Hi, I'm Raymond, and today we're coming to you from the Grand Hotel in Punta del Este, Uruguay. I'm going to interview Clark Eide, whose new novel, A Monk's Way, is very interesting.
Hi, Brad. Yeah, thank you very much. It's nice to be here. It's a beautiful place, Punta del Este.
Clark, what inspired you to create an abbey and a monk to tell your story?
Well, funnily enough, it was my upbringing in a traditional Catholic religion which kind of started it. I wanted to explore the idea of a direct connection to spirit, because for me that's the essence of any spiritual relationship with God. And so I had this idea that other people were like me, and that we might as well set ourselves in a very traditional place, a place of contemplation, and explore this question. I've always felt something of the divine that has been in my life ever since I can remember. And I knew that the religion I was raised in was not really answering that question. I'm sure it's true with a lot of other Christian religions and non-Christian religions. So what I've been discovering through this is the direct connection to God and how important that is.
What is it that you learned about the connection to the divine that you hadn't realized before?
Well, I think what I learned from writing this book, and maybe from the intuitive side that we all have, is that it's with us all the time. The divine thing is not a Sunday worship. It's not reading the Bible periodically. It's a lot of things that involve in everyday living. And we all have that connection that we can develop, and it's an extremely important one if we're going to find any kind of satisfaction in this life.
And how would you define that feeling? Would you consider it awareness?
Yes, it is kind of a type of awareness. It's a good way to put it, Brad. In A Monk's Way, we do talk a lot about awareness, because it's really the first step to becoming attached to the divine part of ourselves. We have to be aware that it's there. And I think traditional religion doesn't always teach us that. It teaches us maybe that we have to obey some rules, maybe go through some intermediary people like clerics to find our way. And I think when you finally discover and have this awareness, this perspective that you develop, you start to feel a certain peace, you start to feel a part of something that's another dimension, quite frankly. And it's easy to kind of poo-poo that and say, well, that's not possible, but I do believe it is. There's a certain peace and eloquence that we see, certainly in monasteries, from the monks I've met.
So, very briefly, Clark, how would you define awareness as you present in The Monk's Way?
I would show it as the beginning of a sense of something else that forces you to keep exploring. I've always been a seeker. I've been through many experiences, many traditional sort of religious connotations. And to me, it's that feeling that something is out there, I've got to find it, and then when you do find it, you find you have a different perspective on everyday life. It's a completely different feeling.
Now, isn't that a difficult story to tell?
Yeah, it is, Brad. It is pretty tough to tell. I spent about 4 years writing this, and I finally reverted back to, instead of some sort of dry description of all this stuff, I said, let's tell a story, because that's the way that these things are best communicated. Call it a parable, call it what you like, but I have created here, in A Monk's Way, a real person. It's a monk, and we follow his tribulations and his trials and all the difficult things he has to do, the temptations he faces. He's a real guy, just like all of us, still searching, even though he's in the confines of an abbey. And what happens is that he takes some pretty unorthodox views, because he finds that, like me, he finds that maybe traditional religion doesn't have all the answers. He's always happy to be a monk. He's extremely happy to be where he is. But this is a real person that we can all identify with. That was my goal, anyway.
So he's actually a fictitious person who's taken on a real personality and persona in the novel.
He does. He takes on a very strong persona for me. I've had a few people who are kind enough to edit the book for me, 7 or 8 people, and they've almost all come back and said, well, I like this Jean Moreau. He's an interesting guy. I'd like to know more about him, and he seems like somebody that we can all identify with. He's somebody who has a good sense of humor. He's a bright guy. Yeah, very much so.
So he is fictitious?
He is fictitious, but there's a funny story about that. About 2 years into the book, I, as I usually do, spent a little time in some monasteries, and I went to one that is no longer occupied. And I walked through in Brittany, where we have our place. I walked through this monastery, And there wasn't much left. At one time, it had been a huge 600 years worth of monastic growth that had gone until the French Revolution put an end to it. But there were hundreds and hundreds of monks, and now there were just the bare ruins of a church. And funny enough, I went up and I saw something I hadn't seen before, which was it was a little plaque, and on that plaque was a tribute to one of the great abbots of that time. And when I looked up, I was almost in disbelief to see that the abbot's name was Jean Moreau. So it was a shock.
And it was also a sign.
Yeah, it was kind of a sign for a guy like me. It's a sign that I was on the right track.
So do you spend a lot of time in abbeys and monasteries?
As much as I can. I love them. We have some beautiful abbeys here in the United States. We have some beautiful abbeys here in France. I try to go 2 or 3 times a year, maybe stay for a week, and I'll develop some great friendships and a real love for the style of life that the monks or the nuns live. They're wonderful people. They're happy people. You don't feel any restrictions. You don't feel any of the sort of things that you might think that you would coming from the world.
Now, when you were writing A Monk's Way, did you have anybody in mind specifically?
Well, good question. I think, once again, it was the everyman I had in mind. It was, my character is drawn to the likenesses of all of us. Particularly, I would say, though, Brad, probably, well, guys like me who are 45 or 50 or a little bit older, who were definitely disenchanted with traditional religion and maybe had grown up with that and had no other idea where to go. And the idea was not necessarily to find another religion, because that isn't necessarily the answer. So, yes, I was looking at people who were mature, who were looking for answers, who weren't finding them, and Jean, through his trials and tribulations, comes back to the divine connection that he loses for a while in the book, and I won't tell you any more about that. But all of us can benefit from that. All of us have to make that connection ourselves. And so I was looking for, I suppose, people who've had a life and now are looking for something that this life doesn't really offer.
Do you feel that you have enough experience and knowledge to partake in such a deep subject and present it in a novel?
Well, you know, Brad, we all have just our own outlooks and our own viewpoints and our own experience to go by. I think for me, I'm a pretty good representative of somebody who's come out of a traditional religion. Somebody who maybe has seen that hasn't answered all the questions for whatever reason. And in my life, yes, the last 25 years, I think I've done everything from going to Druid ceremonies to going to India I've been talking to Hindus, I've been this far away from the Dalai Lama. I've done Irish Celtic wells, I've done just about everything, and I found that all of these things basically revolve around a direct connection to God, whatever that is. It's a direct connection to God that we all seek, and that's the only answer for our own spiritual satisfaction.
So you have spent most of your life looking for something.
That's true, yeah.
And do you think that you've been able to express your own growth, your own search, through Jean Moreau in Amongst Her?
Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, he's a fellow who is a different lifestyle than I do. But the problems he faces, the challenges he faces are pretty universal. And so I think that's probably the best way for me to do it is through that avenue. And I hope it works, you know. It's only my experience and there are many routes. I'm not saying we have the only one. Definitely there's lots of routes to the source.
Now, how can I buy your book?
The most important question. Well, of course you'll want to after this scintillating interview, and I think the easiest way is simply go on Amazon, wherever you are in the world, look up A Monk's Way, and there it will be in both ebook and paperback version. So it's a fairly simple exercise. If you have a Kindle or an e-reader, it's very easy, and if you want to get an actual physical copy, you can.
Now, Clark, one last question. This novel covers a lot of your search, of Jean Moreau's search. Do you think there could be a sequel?
You know, Brad, I had to pare this book down from probably 500 pages to 300 or whatever it is, and you're absolutely right. I have enough for another book or two, and because there's a lot of things to explore when you get into this, and traditionally when you come out of a traditional religious background. So yeah, Jean is not finished yet. He's going to be back around.
Well, I look forward to the next interview. Thank you
I do
for your
too.
time, and thank you to our photographer, Jose Andres. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Nice to see you.